Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers!
Happy birthday to you.
Hello. Welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander, and each week we explore what's working and what's not in our friendships, community, and connections. Have you ever wished you could sit down and have a conversation about what is really going on in your friendships? Well, you found your people. Join us as we dive into real-life stories and explore new ways to approach these connections. Together, we're reimagining the rules of friendship. I did not plan to have this episode in my queue. This episode has been in my queue for a minute now. And it just so happens to be that, I didn't plan this. But when I noticed that it was in there, I was like, oh, we're going to bump that up because this episode is both universally relevant and deeply personal. Today, we're going to talk about how illness, specifically chronic illness, impacts our friendships. And I am so grateful to our guest today for showing up to have this vulnerable conversation because it is not easy to talk about this stuff. Now, if you're wondering why I say this is deeply personal, if you listened to last week's episode, you know I shared a little bit here on the podcast, and I have been sharing more on my social media, especially over on Instagram. But I have been struggling with some health issues for quite a while now, probably for a few years. But over the last year, it got really bad. And I have been trying my hardest to not only manage my symptoms on my own, but to get my doctor to a point where they would refer me to a specialist, which could be an episode all on its own, navigating the medical system. The thing about today's episode is that it impacts all of us. This is good information for everybody to have. Even if you don't have a friend right now who has a chronic illness or has cancer or has had a major accident, you probably will in your life. We all need to be thinking about how to navigate these friendships. And today's episode is going to give you a variety of ideas of how to show up if your friend is the one experiencing the illness. Now, it's not an exhaustive list by all means. This episode is very, very rich in ideas for you. And if you are someone who is experiencing illness, like me, first of all, I'm sending you a big hug because this is not easy. I'm literally recording this today with so much fatigue symptoms. So if you can hear that in the narration, well, here we are. But if that is you, this episode will leave you feeling less alone in this experience. It is hard. It is hard to navigate your friendships and your relationships in a moment where not only is your health your utmost absolute priority, but as we know, friendships take work and you may not have the capacity to put work in. But the catch-22 is this is the exact moment that you need those people. And that's hard. So again, I'm sending you a big hug. I hope that this episode leaves you feeling less alone. Now, let me introduce our guest today. Catherine is a nervous system-friendly purpose and business coach, author, founder of LifeDesign and the Inspired Soul podcast. But most of all, she is a total freedom lover. After overcoming chronic illness and narcissistic childhood abuse, she now helps other sensitive, multi-passionate high achievers transform their trauma patterns like procrastination, anxiety, perfectionism, self-doubt, burnout, and overwhelm into total freedom in their business and into emotional freedom to thrive and be who you are. I don't want to take up any more time. This is a great episode. Let's dive in. Hi, Catherine.
Hello.
I'm so excited to be talking with you. We came on here to talk about friendship when, as you call it, the perfect storm hit. And as I was saying before, how you're managing friendship and community when kind of everything falls apart at once and you're at this point of complete reset complete evaluation of a lot of pieces of life. Can you tell people, whatever you're willing to share, kind of what led you to that perfect storm moment?
Yeah. I sometimes also call it when shit hit the fan because that's exactly what it
Well,
what it
yep.
felt.
I wasn't going to say it, but you said it.
Yeah, it's just, visualizes so well what happened. So I was kind of living a dream life. I'd found my dream partner. I'd been running my business as a purpose and business coach, dream business, total freedom, everything. I also was living dream island life. I moved to a Mediterranean island. I have the beach 100 meters away from my house, and, so many things that so many people dream about. And then I got very, very sick. I had a complete overwhelm of all my systems. I was reeling from a miscarriage, so my hormones were completely out of whack. I had stress at work. We were just publishing a book. I also had my mother, like family members visiting, which is always can always be stressful if you have, if you have families that.
I understand that
Yes.
very well. Yes. Yes.
So if you're not the perfect dream book family, and at that point I did get on with my mother. It wasn't like it was completely triggering from start to finish, but I felt some exhaustion coming up the longer she stayed. I was also packing my entire house because we're going to leave for 2 months to go to Austria, where my family is from. Me and my mother took a flight back to Austria. I did not sleep at all, like for 36 hours. So I was sleep deprived. And then we had a family barbecue with my grandparents. And that day I found out that my granddad had to go to hospital the night before. And, I was really scared that he would die. And there was a lot of complications.
Yeah, this is so much at one
It was
time.
just total overwhelm for me. I was exhausted before all that happened, and then I was just beyond. And that's what you call a perfect storm, because my system crashed. And I didn't know this at the time, but basically I went into a complete freeze state. My body was shutting down everything. I had no energy left to brush my teeth. I had no energy left to look after myself, like get myself food or anything like that. I was kind of gone, I was non-existent. I was like, I need to
Like a shell of
somehow.
yourself. Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it. So, and if you think it was over, if you might think it was over a week later, because we all sometimes get exhausted. It was probably a string of things that had happened the years before that, including a Hashimoto's diagnosis. So I already had the diagnosis of autoimmune disease, but otherwise I had been a normal, healthy person. And I'll get to the community aspect in a minute and the friendship aspect, because this is what your show is about. And this is also something I think we need to talk about. I slid into chronic illness. So this was the starting point, or maybe it was the crashing point, that's for sure. And I didn't get up anymore properly for a couple of months. I was just, like you were saying, a shell of myself, couldn't manage daily tasks anymore, and, had to pause my business. God, we measured I think my adrenal function, and we measured cortisol levels and all those kind of things, and my thyroid levels. They were beyond, there was nothing left. There was just so, even my blood values showed that there was no energy left in me.
For anybody who doesn't know, because I'm actually looking at my cortisol levels, joys of my past. For anybody that doesn't know, what you're referring to is basically when everything goes so high for so long, and at a certain point, your body the values plummet because it just stops producing anymore. So I think that's what you're talking about, is it's high for a while and you want to catch it there if it's that bad, which is what I'm trying to do. But if you don't, they all plummet and your body just is not producing these hormones that it needs to function for things like energy and digestion and brain capacity, not having brain fog. All these things are impacted. Every system, like you're saying, every
Exactly.
system.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I started to accumulate symptoms and diagnoses. So It started with little things like brain fog, which I'd had before, finding it really hard to find your words. In the end, I had accumulated over 30 symptoms. Some of them were inflammation, some of them were more mental health things like anxiety, panic attacks, depression. After this went on for a couple of years. You don't get up and feel full of hope anymore after having been chronically ill for a couple of years. Again, you slide into depression quite easily. Your hormones are still out of whack anyway. Gum disease.
I mean, my experience, not that I would call myself chronically ill, but I get what you're saying. You wake up every day like wondering what today's symptoms are going to be. What is the pain level going to be? What is my capacity? How many things am I going to have to cancel? If I go to that meeting, am I even going to be useful? If I meet up with that friend, will I even be able to carry on the conversation? And that's intense, to wake up every day like not trusting that you can do the things you want to do or you need to do. This episode is so funny because I'm getting to watch like my own journey in navigating my health in the last year. When I recorded this episode, I just said here, like, I would not call myself chronically ill. Only in the last couple weeks have I started really accepting that about myself. Now, I am okay. I am nowhere near as bad as I could be based on what the diagnoses are that my doctor thinks I have. I have not quite gotten to the point where it's official yet. We are literally running all the tests, but she's pretty sure. This is interesting because I can see my own progression in this journey. And I can see myself moving through this journey of accepting my situation. And the reason I point that out is because not only you might see this with your friends, but things are changing so rapidly as you're accepting it that what your friend says to you on one day might be different on another, right? Like I was telling my friends, like, I'm fine, I'm going to be fine, as if nothing's going to change, partially because I didn't want to accept that. And they might be saying that to you when they don't appear to be fine. You're like, you're not fine, right? We've all had those moments with our friends. There also might be moments where your friend looks completely fine. And yet when they're giving you all these life updates, they're telling you about how bad their health has been recently. And you're like, these things don't align. When I recorded this episode with Catherine was about the time when most of my life updates, when I would start hanging out with friends, started being about my health. And when our friendship hangouts went from, yeah, I'm down to do anything, to like, hey, I can hang out, but like, we got to do it on your couch. Like, I don't really have the energy to go do whatever tonight. So I'm just pointing this out because if somebody is navigating the beginning stages of this, the point where they're just starting to accept it themselves, things may not seem aligned, or they may tell you one thing and the next time they see you, they could say, I'm fine. And the next time they see you, they could say, I'm really sick. And you're like, wait, whiplash, what is going on? And it's probably not about you if you're the friend. It's probably just about them accepting their own journey. At least that was the case for me.
Yeah, and you feel totally let down by your own body. You feel totally let down by your own health. I was 38, 39 at the time. I'm like, I hadn't been ill 38 years prior, barely even caught a cold. And you just sit there and you go, what is going to happen today? My back pain and neck pain became chronic. I had insomnia, didn't sleep for almost a week. I thought I was going to die, Yeah, then we had a lot of thyroid issues.
I do. I know better than you. I'm like, I do know, actually.
I'm
very
so
well.
sorry.
Insomnia has been a big problem for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. Horrible feeling.
And it just like this all stacks up and impacts truly every facet of life, everything. And it comes in at the most core level, even, right? Like feeding yourself, sleeping, drinking water. Like even that stuff's hard. The basics, the most fundamental survival pieces are hard, let alone anything else above and beyond that.
Basic functions don't function anymore, basically. And the same applies to your circle of friends and family. So as this went on, I felt like, okay, I've lost my business because I cannot work anymore. I feel totally unable to perform anything. Like we were saying, even basic tasks seemed impossible. So at one point, I felt like, okay, I've lost my business. I've lost my financial stability. I've lost my family. I've lost my friends. And I was about to lose my partner because he came to a point as well where he said, I cannot continue with you on this journey. He was exhausted. He had turned into the sole income earner, into my massage therapist, into my psychologist, into the person bringing me a drink so I would feed myself, or, so I would drink something. He would bring me food and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
He was beyond exhausted as well. He said,
Yeah.
he doesn't suffer and die and wither. Basically, he said, I think we have to break up. That was he was so desperate. It wasn't that he didn't love me anymore. That was the final pillar that broke away. And then I checked myself into hospital for over a month to get some basic stability in me again. And that was a big turning point. And I'll talk about my healing journey as well, because if you're wondering now, talking all about all these depressing things, I am fully healed. I am back. I am joyful, peaceful, regulated, so many things. I've changed completely, and my personality is completely different, which again makes it very difficult to maintain relationships, maintain friendships that you once had. That a lot of people, especially in my family, so let's talk about family first, they live 2,000 kilometers away. I live 2,000 kilometers away. I chose to move that far away for many, many reasons, but they did not know what was wrong with me. I did not know what was wrong with me. 12,000 doctors did not know what was wrong with me. Okay, that might be a slight exaggeration, but it felt like visiting,
but a lot.
doctors every day of those 3 years I was chronically ill. So they could not really fathom what was going on. So they just thought I stopped calling. They just thought, when I told them I'm not well, they're like, oh, that's a bummer. Get well soon. Yeah, it didn't happen really. So they could not, and they still to this day don't really know what happened. And a family member recently said, well, you're making excuses. I don't think being ill for 3 years is making excuses, but they did not see or witness me. So they don't know what is going on. They don't know about trauma. They don't know about trauma responses. They have no idea. And I could not explain it at the time. So I felt like I'd lost pretty much everyone in my family. And then I started losing friends. Some people kept calling, but most people, when they call you and for the 10th time you say, well, I'm not really well today, they're going to stop calling, or they did stop calling in my friendship circles.
Mm-hmm.
And, the other side, my personal experience was also, being on the phone to somebody was exhausting. Like if I had a phone call, I had to go lie down for 2 days. It felt just knackering and exhausting to try and keep these relationships up, because I didn't have anything else to talk about anymore. And this is such an important point. I also tried to accommodate my friends and saying, I'm okay. How are you? So we would switch topic to them, but people listening is also a task, and it takes energy out of you. So yeah, it became more and more difficult to keep up these relationships. I hope that makes sense what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are so many important points in this episode. If we go back for a second, like you moved to your Mediterranean island. I won't say where you
Okay,
live.
Cyprus.
You know what I was about to.
It's okay.
Okay, if you moved to Cyprus in 2018, what was your friendship, community, situation feeling? Like, how are you feeling before the perfect storm happened?
It was already fragmented because I was born in Austria. I grew up in the UK. I studied in the UK. Well, I grew up in Austria and the UK. So then studied and stayed in London for 8 years, and then moved back to my old hometown of Salzburg in Austria. Sound of Music for everybody that knows it.
I was just
Yeah.
there. Okay, anyways, keep going.
Yes. So I stayed in Austria for almost 10 years and then moved to Cyprus. So it was already, I had built a group of friends in Austria, but I now, looking back, realized there was a lot of trauma bonding. I went through a divorce in 2010. So I had a lot of bad drinking habits. I pretty much fell off the rails back then already. And so my friendship circle was made up of a lot of wonderful people that had also experienced trauma. And there was a lot of trauma bonding and us going out drinking, forgetting our troubles and worries. I was 30 by the time, I think, and people, usually you go drinking and partying in your 20s, but no, I did that too. But I went back to drinking and partying at 30 because I was so hurt there was so many rejection and abandonment wounds popping up from my divorce and my 7-year relationship ending.
Well, honestly, those activities in this situation make sense, right? So I talk about like a lot about the shared experiences we have with friends. Like, what are we doing together? And I think what you're talking about is super common. If you aren't in a place where you have a lot of passions and interests and forward trajectory and goals and whatever, your shared experiences quite often end up being kind of those numbing activities like going out and drinking. It also facilitates this kind of feeling of, like, oh, well, we're super close because we have a few drinks. And then we start talking about life. And yeah, you start sharing, but there is this buffer of like substance between you where you wake up the next morning and you're like, did they really want to tell me that? Were they just too many beers in to have a filter anymore when they're telling me about that really bad thing that happened to them? You don't trust the shares the same way. Like the vulnerability piece is not there. You're bonding over an activity that isn't really positive in your life. But a lot of people build friendships that way and then are frustrated when maybe they're moving on to a different phase of life and those friendships don't translate. And I'm not saying they can't translate, but it requires like building those friendships around something else, joining other groups together, finding other activities, bonding over some new goal you have, like even just getting together and meeting up and hanging out without a substance. So you can, but you have to build new patterns, different patterns. I think like what you're talking about is very important because I think a lot of people are frustrated about the state of their friendships, not realizing that they're centered around something they don't even want them to be centered around.
Yeah, and you explained that so beautiful just now. Some of these friendships don't translate. And I think the added difficulty for me also was, moving away 2,000 kilometers.
Mm-hmm.
Also, another friend and myself, we both got into long-term relationships, and this was 2014. So we didn't need each other as much anymore. And yeah, life changed, and we do need to make an effort to translate these things, as you put it. That was hard though. And I think we still were friends up until maybe 2017, 18, and then a new phase of my life started, really. Yeah.
And then you moved, which makes it very easy to just kind of check in with yourself and be like, I don't really want to do that anymore. Or it's not even really very easy to keep up with those friendships because you don't live in the same place to go out drinking. And you don't really have, as I call them, like the right roots to depend on. And you're sitting there being like, do I even want to build new roots? What positive is going to come out of this? So I think it makes a lot of sense, logically in my brain, that you moved and you were probably checking in with yourself and you were like, a lot of this either is too difficult to translate or I really am okay just letting it go.
Yeah.
And I will build something new here in this next chapter.
Now, when you say that, I do feel some nostalgia and sadness coming up around that, of course, because these were people that were once very important in my life, and I was very important in theirs. So there also needs to be a certain grieving process.
Oh, yes. 100%. That's the piece of like, they weren't bad friends.
No, absolutely not.
Right? Like they served the purpose and filled a piece of your life at a time. They weren't bad. Going out and partying wasn't bad. You were choosing to do that too, but you don't want to do that anymore. So it's not bad versus good. There's nostalgia, like you're saying, and it's worth grieving. And there were great parts and great memories. But, this is like a two truths thing. You moved and you were ready to build something new.
Yeah. And as it happens in Cyprus, I started building relationships. I had found some friends and, I started to feel more an integral part of that community. It started to feel good, but then I started having trauma responses from my childhood trauma, which was emotional and narcissistic abuse mostly. And I started to get worse. So the first diagnosis started to come in around 2019, 2018, 2019. So I wasn't really able to build a solid base of friendship, solid community. And this is the curious part. Like now we do have friends here, but it's a very small circle. I've not been able, I don't know if I'd want to, but I've not been able to build loads of friends around me. It's been really, really difficult. I always admire when you tell your stories. It's like, oh, that sounds so good. Having friends over for lunch or dinner, and you just call them up and 35 people show up. For me at this point, and I'm going to be very vulnerable and open here, it's more like all my friends have partners, they have kids. So it's like, yeah, let's meet up next month. Oh no, next month is not looking so good. How about the month after? That's my friendships at the moment, in my local friendships. But at the same time, I have some friendships with digital nomads who spend intense amount of time. You have to stay like 60 days in Cyprus to be a tax resident here. So there's a certain incentive for entrepreneurs and digital nomads. So there's a lot of them that stay here for 60 days, and I get on with some of them really, really well. So now this is so weird in a way. Nowadays, I have friends who I'm very close to who come for 60 days. So I see them for 60 days. Most of the time straight. Some of them live with us, that kind of very intense friendships that then go their separate lives, separate ways again after that quite often. Yeah, what a weird life, isn't it? But what weird friendships I have.
I mean, yes and no. Like the set of circumstances are unique with the Cyprus visa and whatever, but I think that a lot of people have similar situations. Like I don't think that anything here is quote unquote not normal, whatever normal is, because I don't think there is a normal, but like there's a couple things that came to mind when you were telling kind of this like since Cyprus. And the first one is, you were saying that when the perfect storm hit, you didn't really have all those close local friends. And in my mind, I'm like, well, yeah, you hadn't lived there very long. Like it takes a little bit of time to build those deeper connections and to build connections that when you do have, even if it's not the perfect storm, but something big happened in your life, like you've let them in enough that they actually know how to help you. They've learned enough about you. They have built strong enough beliefs about this friendship. I think when something really bad happens and you can't build new connection points very well, you are really, I have this whole roots analogy, right? If we think about it, if you have like newer, smaller, thinner roots, there's not a lot to like feed off of. And they're going to like wither and die, basically. But if you have this like longer, stronger friendship, when the bad things happen, you can kind of feed off those bigger beliefs and things and whatever. And that will sustain the friendship for a while somebody is recovering. And if it's like a chronic illness, you might have periods where you feel a little better and you can grow some new stuff and other periods where it's not. But this is all to say, in my mind, I'm like, this makes sense. This makes sense to me. I'm not surprised by your situation at all. I don't think you did anything wrong. I think that the perfect storm just hit at a really, really, as they always do, inconvenient time. Because, had you had maybe 5 more years, 3 more years in Cyprus, you maybe would have built this deeper pool of connection, and that would have helped. But
There wasn't time.
yeah, there wasn't time. There wasn't time. Then when the perfect storm hit, the other thing I really want to acknowledge is you said, like, you're a whole new person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is so important to call out, because what happens then is the friendships you have, you're not starting over from scratch, but like, for example, things you once knew about a friend, their favorite food, the ways they like to spend time together, their routines, all of that changes. So you're kind of having to learn about a new friend and adjust. And again, I have that roots metaphor. So it's like roots are dying and you're having to grow new ones. So it kind of resets a lot of friendships, or at least maybe makes them feel like they took a couple steps back because you have to rebuild your foundation. I have another personal example, but maybe to help you see this in your own friendships, right? I'm talking here about this idea of when you are navigating a long-term illness, and I have to make a lot of changes. Like, I am having to do big lifestyle shifts, which is not easy. It's not easy at all. But then I'm having to communicate those to my friends. So a big thing for me has been food in this illness journey. There's a lot of foods that are triggering like multi-day system kind of explosions of symptoms. So I have had to cut out so many foods recently. My diet is honestly comical, guys. But I've had to cut everything from like tomatoes, avocado, banana, strawberries, broth, like weird things. There's probably 15 other things I've had to cut out. Now, remember, I grew up in a foodie family. Like, my mom owned a catering company growing up. Food is a huge thing in my family and in my friendships for anything we celebrate. My whole business journey started as a food blog. And now I am cutting out huge chunks of food. Hopefully not forever, fingers crossed. My doctor thinks that eventually I can get some of them back in once I get more stable. But the reason I point this out is because if you go back, listen to episode 12, I talk about my roots theory. One of those roots is the emotional intimacy roots, which includes the details my friends know about me. And right now, those details are changing so quickly, right? When I get together with a friend, if restaurants we would normally go out to, like Indian food, I love going out for Indian. Currently, I can't eat that. It's really hard for me to navigate an Indian restaurant right now. The dishes that they normally cook when I come over, I can't eat those. And I don't expect any of my friends to navigate this. Most of them have been incredibly sweet and like asked what I can eat, asked if this recipe works, asked if they need to leave anything out. Again, like, I very much appreciate that. But it's a lot of work, not just for me to communicate, but for them to try and navigate, for them to try and rewrite those current details they know about me. And they may not even be details that they know about me forever. Like, I have friends, right, who live across the country who don't really know, and I'm about to go show up and see them. And so many things are about to change so suddenly that they know about me, versus the present friends who I'm around all the time, who it's like, oh, well, this week we're adding tomatoes, we're adding bananas, we're adding whatever. It sounds so silly, but it's true. Other friends, right, those historic friends, it's like I'm ripping the Band-Aid off because so many things are different. And I'm just pointing this out because that means that in my friendships, not only am I in a place where I maybe don't have the same energy to navigate all this work, but it requires more work. And that is hard. I am lucky that my friends have for the most part, like navigated this with so much grace and are trying. I'm really trying to acknowledge that and thank them for that. But I guess what I'm trying to point out is if you are the person experiencing the illness, it's understandable why this is exhausting, like it's more work. And if you are the friend who is trying, one, good on you. And two, yes, it is more work. That is why it feels harder right now, because you are having to update all this old information as your friend is navigating these big life choices.
That's such a great visual with the roots. I really, really love it. And I do think that, especially when I go back to Salzburg for a while, I might be able to rebuild some old friendships that I do care about people. It's not like maybe some people think I stopped caring about them. I did not, you know. Some of these things can be rebuilt, I think. But I also really want to acknowledge two people or two types of people. Well, it's kind of one type of people, but there were two friends who were further away. They live in Munich. And those were phone friends all throughout those years. So I have a lot of phone friends I can speak to still, and some new. And I really have to say, those two particular friends, they kept calling. They understood somehow. And that makes me quite emotional, actually. I realized that, wow, that's so sweet that they kept calling, you know? They kept calling because they sort of understood that I was not able to. I did not have the energy or the right mental state or whatever. But when they called and I picked up, I always felt better. And these were friends who would, even after 2 years, 3 years, ask, "How are you?" And they were so brave for doing that. And they genuinely wanted to know how I was. And they could hold space. So they themselves were in somewhat regulated nervous system states, because I look at everything from the point of nervous system. They were quite regulated throughout the time. And that was beautiful. One of them had experience with depression. One of them had experience with a partner that went through depression. So they kind of knew, keep asking, keep showing up. And that was just wonderful. So for everybody who has a friend, and maybe this is a little shout out to, everybody who has a friend that might be going through chronic illness, that might be disappearing from your radar. It's the most wonderful thing you can do as a friend, to still, occasionally at least, keep calling, keep asking, "How are you?" And don't be afraid of the answer. It's all about holding space. And, they will hopefully get better at some point, and you will be able to resume the friendship stronger and better. And those are friends I still talk to and I still value deeply. And now I can hold space for them again, and they call me up for advice or, for me to listen to them. And that's what they did for me. And that was such a gift.
I did just want to say that the thing that stands out to me there, I think about this in my personal life a lot. I've had some friends go through some really intense things in the last few years, is that when, as we said in the beginning, shit hits the fan, as a friend, quite often we want to be able to fix it. And that's a lot of pressure. One, we probably can't. Two, if we go back to your partner, like the pressure to be the one sole person that it all falls on is a lot. And I think sometimes we put that on ourselves when something happens to someone we care about. I have friends that live far away. Like I have to get on a flight and I would love to just drop everything and move in with them and help them through this period of life and whatever. But that's not sustainable. And when I'm listening to you talk about your experience, I also am then like thinking to myself, what you needed was like those simple, consistent phone calls. Sure. Would somebody have like flying down to help your partner been helpful? Sure. Yes. But like what you really had capacity for wasn't even that much. Like the phone calls were still a lot. What I'm trying to say here is for all of us to remember that when shit has hit the fan, maybe the best thing we can do is pick one small, consistent thing and keep doing it that is like sustainable. Because the receiver, honestly, probably doesn't have capacity for much else anyways.
So adding to that one consistent thing is, I do truly think that the most important thing you can do is hold space. What that means is just be there and really listen to anything they might have to say and tell you. And even though, no, you cannot know what that feels like. No, you luckily have not gone through this, but holding space and just being present and listening is healing in so many ways.
I did have one more aha moment, and then I do want to talk about the current state of your friendships. And that is, if somebody in your life is super low, if shit has hit the fan, I also think what I've seen work in my friend groups is if you have your people, like that net of people, maybe they know each other, maybe they don't. If they do know each other, what I'm about to suggest is easier. If they don't, I would tell you it is worth pillaging someone's like Instagram followers for that friend you know they're talking to, but you don't really know, and sending them a message and being like, hey, we all know Catherine's going through a lot. I think we should kind of all just be connected. Here's why I say that. Because we've had friends in the past who have gone through some really intense things. And like one friend in particular is coming to mind who was very depressed for a very long time. When you are holding space like that, it is natural to get burnt out. The best thing we did as a group of friends was when one of us tapped out, we told the others. So we would basically say like, hey, I've been talking to this friend quite a bit recently, and I just need a little bit of a break. And someone else would reach out and make a point of consistently checking in. And that way, somebody had a moment to kind of regroup, and it never fell on one person. And if you have a friend group, that's a little bit easier to do because you all know each other and you feel comfortable talking about this. But if you have a friend who has, like that college friend and that high school friend they stay with and the 2 local friends and the whatever, reach out and just say, hey, I know we're all trying to help and we're all going to burn out at some point. But the most important thing is just like letting other people know so that they can step in. So just throwing that out there for anybody. I think it has been very impactful, especially in a long term, like something that's happening for years. There's nothing wrong with you as a friend if you need a couple months of like a little less contact to recharge because it's intense. So let's talk about the current state of your friendships.
And just to add to what you just said, it's almost like it's not a follow train, it's more like a check-in train or hold space train where you take turns, which is just beautiful and such a wonderful idea. So let's talk about the current state of friends. So one other thing I wanted to mention before we get into the positive of this, what I found personally really difficult is friends calling and say, how are you? I'm like, yeah, I'm a little better. Oh, that's great. So what else is going on with you? They didn't want to hear about me getting better either. It was just too much. And I understand, this is not judgment. I understand, especially if somebody who's been ill or depressed for years, if you kept asking them how they are and then they go, oh, not so well, and then finally they go, yeah, I'm a little better. Friends were almost glossing over this. There were a couple of friends who I did not feel heard or seen because what I had done, I had healed within 4 months. And this was incredible. I mean, I was as good as symptom free 4 months later after I discovered nervous system regulation and brain retraining. These were 2 tools that saved my life. So I would have gone through years and years more of illness. So I had been chronically ill for 3 years and then 4 months got better, symptom free, and started building up my life again. That was a miracle. I mean, going through that was mind blowing to me, was mind blowing to the people who saw the transformation and the change. But again, there were some friends were fantastic. They said, wow, what you'd been through, tell me more. That's amazing. And some would just bypass. Oh yeah, that's great. So let's talk about something else. And I felt so horrible to me at the time. But anyway, I just wanted to give that distinction of what made a good friend being in that position. And I mean, I don't know if I can talk about how, I mean, I wasn't a good friend at the time, and it's easier for me to see what helped me and what didn't. So maybe that's why I'm trying to share again what people can do who
Yeah.
have friends going through something similar. So now coming to my current support network, my circle of friends is small. I still have my phone friends, the same ones from back then. I have reconnected with some really old friends from school, and that was just wonderful. We're like, I think we're going to be friends for life. If we've been friends for 25 years now, we didn't hear from each other for those 3 years. We did not speak during that time I was ill, but we reconnected and we were like, this is great. And I also have deep and meaningful friendships with the people that come to Cyprus for 60 days, some of these people. And I still have my partner, who's a big part of that support network. And I have my therapist. And that might sound so weird.
Nope, bring it
The
up.
difference
Yes.
now is I have a support network, a very small but super important support network. There's 3 or 4 people I can really lean on if I need it, including my therapist, who I don't consider a friend, but a pillar in my support network. And this is so, so crucial.
There are times, I call this out in my book, actually. I don't talk about it enough on social, but I talk about this in the book. It's like sometimes the support you need is a professional.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it is a therapist. Sometimes it is a doctor. Sometimes it is a coach. Sometimes it is a something. And like, I think we can, I mean, I'm not talking about therapists, but like sometimes I do think there are coaches where people are opting to pay because it is easier to like open up to friends. And that's like its own topic. But we need to call those out. Like, those are important people. And that is a vital part. And I get they're not a friend, but they are a vital part of your overall support network because they keep you healthier and safer and whatever to build those other friendships.
And I do not expect my partner or my friends to do that work for or with me.
Yes.
I'm not putting that on my friends to know what to do with somebody who has had depression. How would my friends have known? I see that now. I tried to get some sense of safety from them. I was desperate. I was clinging on to be whole again, to not feel so lonely. But of course, my friends didn't know what to do. They are not professionals, and that's okay. Now, going back and looking back, I do see that this was such an important pillar, like you were just saying. Professionals knew what to do with me in any state. And friends don't sometimes. Friends are not trained professionals. They're there to share the joy, the fun, and the hard times, of course, but not medical conditions. So, yeah, and a lot of my friends and especially my partner learned a lot. So he now knows how to support me most of the time. But again, I think a big part of my healing journey was really taking on that self responsibility for your own state, for your own emotions, and not putting it on other people. So, my partner is not there to make me feel better. And that is such a hugely important thing. I know we're going into relationship territory there now, but my friends are not there to make me feel better. I am responsible for making me feel better. And for me, in order to do that, I know who to reach out to. I know who's the right person for the right job at that time when I do need support. And also, a lot of my friends are come now from this healing community that we've gone through this together. So I did a couple of certificates. I did nervous system regulation courses. I did brain retraining courses. And I have a friend in India now. I've never been to India, but I have a friend in India now who I can lean on because she has been on the same journey. So I have, of course, my friendship circle has extended. I have included people now who know what that felt like going through a similar experience. I also still have old friends from school, like I was saying, but I'm so much richer and abundant, more abundant now with friendships with similar experiences that we can lean on each other. And that's amazing. I'm a new personality. And yes, of course, you add new people to your collection. I mean, that sounds a bit bad, but it's not a collection. But yeah, you add people who have gone through things with you on top of everybody else.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned earlier some vulnerability about having like a small group and how you maybe have heard about the people I have locally and things like that. But two things. One, I have been building my net for a very long time now without a major reset like you had. I have not moved to an entirely different country. I have not had a perfect storm. All of my, even though, I mean, my story, even through all of that, I have still had pretty solid baseline function on the day to day. I have not had that complete shutdown. So, like, that's just something for anybody who's listening to remember is if you don't have what you want, look at how long you've been building it, because I've been building mine for a long time. It takes time. And I think that there's something so important in knowing like what that vision is. Some people are going to listen to the fact that I can, send out a message and get a bunch of people over for dinner and think, I don't want that. And that's fine. But if me talking about that like calls to you, then that is, where to put your energy over a period of time, because you can totally build that for yourself. The other thing I want to say is I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit for how intentional you have been about building this broader network. Sure, they may not be local, but you now have people, if we compare this to the stories about, the people you were going out and partying with who were lovely and served that time in your life, you have built this broader net that really, really serves this current time in your life. And I would venture to say, right, because we can't necessarily build all the connections we want in all the different ways in all the different areas. You've probably put more energy into connecting with people about these certain experiences, these certain trainees, these certain goals, your professional life, the digital nomad piece. And it sounds to me like you feel pretty strong in that. And now you can invest a little bit more of your energy in the local piece.
True.
It's not that you haven't done it. You're just maybe not acknowledging the work you've done in this other part. And I get why, because societally, we don't give much credit to that because the focus is on those like very close, present, call them over friends. But there is value in the other piece you have built, as you know. I know you know that. But I'm just calling that out for anybody that's listening and thinking like somebody might realize now that they've actually done a lot of work for themselves, just like you have, that they've never really given themselves credit for.
The puzzle looks different that's been put together here. The jigsaw just looks a bit different than we think it should look, possibly. Yeah. And this is so weird. This is just when you were talking just now, I realized that I've actually started saying I love you to friends.
I say I love you to friends all the time.
I presume you do, but I've not done this before. So this is a couple of months ago that started. I'm really happy to tell these people I love you, because I truly do. I mean, we've cried together, and the relationships I now have, the friendships I now have, are so deep and meaningful to me that I consider myself very, very lucky, even with this smaller puzzle, that smaller jigsaw.
That in itself is a transformation.
Ah,
starting to say I love you.
Yeah, that is a true transformation. Never noticed that. Never realized that before. And also when you were talking, what came to mind just now was Tony Robbins' quote: "Most people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in 10." I think that applies here too.
I very wholeheartedly think that. I think a lot of people just think, you should be able to kind of snap your fingers and build what you want. And if you can't do that, there's something wrong with you. And we're just not talking enough about this is no different than any other area of life, right? If you want to build a savings account, emergency fund, most people are not just transferring X tens of thousands of dollars into an account next month. They're doing this over an extended period of time. You know, if you want to run a marathon, you're not just waking up next week and doing it. If you want to completely transform your nervous system, you're not going to make that overnight. Like everything we're doing in our life is built on small, consistent habits and actions that are quite often so small we kind of actually forget that we've done it. And community and friendship's no different. It's just these like small investments that build into what we want over time.
And sometimes you have to do withdrawals from your friendship deposit account or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah. Catherine, I want to thank you for this conversation. You've been through some very intense experiences in the past few years. And I know that's caused a huge shakeup in your life. And I know you do talk about this stuff, but like maybe not, as you were saying, with the community and friendship piece. This is a new piece of the puzzle. So I just want to thank you for coming on here and your vulnerability and for sharing with everyone, because I think there are a good number of people out there who are just like silently thinking something's wrong with them. And hearing a conversation like this is going to make them realize that they can't rebuild.
Yeah. Oh, this is actually a skill I learned because you just mentioned that. This is a skill I only learned in the last couple of years, rebuilding, repairing, whether that's my relationship. I did not know how to do that before. I know this sounds so weird. I'm over 40 now, so I did not know how to repair relationships before. I do now. So that is such a valuable skill I learned in the process. Did not intend to, of course, but this is what life taught me involuntarily.
No. But such an important skill.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't need to start over all the time. Quite often we actually have something we're working with. Thanks again, Catherine.
Such a pleasure. Beautiful conversations as always with you. So thank you so much. Such an honor.
As with so many of my episodes, there's no exact solution. Like I don't have, here's the 5 ways to navigate friendship with chronic illness. It's so personal. It is so nuanced. There's no way that this episode between my experience and Catherine's experience covers everybody's experience. But my hope is that it is one more story out there that might give us all ideas for how to navigate friendships when chronic illness is at play. Now, something that I want to call out that I didn't really bring up in this episode, but I just want to call it out, is that you heard Catherine talk about it a little bit, right? Like virtual connection, long distance connection, phone calls, text messages, social media, things like that. They are so important because sometimes they are the only thing that is accessible to someone who maybe is so fatigued they are homebound. And that is actually a big reason why I really push this message that virtual connections are so similar to in-person connections, that you can build friendships that way, that you can find community and connection, because for some people, this is the only lifeline. And we didn't really get into that, but I just want to call it out because I think that it's so important. If you are somebody out there who is struggling with a chronic illness or has a big diagnosis, had something that completely shifted, I would love to feature more of these stories on the podcast. So if you are willing to share, please reach out. I think that this is an important topic that we need to cover again and again and again. With that, see you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle at it's Alex Alexander, or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.